It's really about freedom and ending tyranny. I wouldn't be running if it wasn't for what happened over the last couple of years. I think we saw more erosion of freedoms globally and in America than we've ever seen in our lifetime. Kind of anybody alive. Generally, most people, especially people, our age, and, people under age 80 or so, it's something that we really haven't seen, this level of erosion of freedoms, where we have people, in Australia and New Zealand and Canada being sent to camps and movement shut down, and quite chilling things here in the United States, where we have people being told what information is true by the politicians, people being locked down and kept from their business and kept from their employment for a year or 2 years, kids being kept home, people forced to wear masks, attempts to force people to have an injection, these kind of things. That's just not America. That's not the America that I grew up in. It's not what I recognize. And we have to fight it. We have to fight it or we're going to lose our country. So somebody's got to do it.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like and comment below. And to find future episodes in your feed and push notifications, make sure you subscribe. And if you click the little bell, you'll get every new episode as it's released. Thanks again for watching. Today, I'm sitting down with Bruce Fenton. Bruce is a Bitcoin libertarian that is running on the Republican ticket for the U.S. Senate out of the state of New Hampshire. Previously, Bruce was in the U.S. Navy, and after the military, he became the vice president at Morgan Stanley and later founded and was the managing director and chief investment officer at Atlantic Financial. Bruce is an early Bitcoiner, and he served as a volunteer executive director for the oldest industry group in the Bitcoin space, the Bitcoin Foundation, which he was also later a board member of. Bruce later co-founded the popular Satoshi Roundtable, which is an annual invite-only Bitcoin industry VIP retreat. Today, Bruce is the CEO of Chainstone Labs, which is an investment and advisory company, and the main business there is owning a broker-dealer called Watchdog Capital. So with that said, let's dive in with the one and only Bruce Fenton. Hey guys, I'm going to take a quick pause to introduce the first sponsor on the Jay Gould Show. I am happy and proud to say that this show is now sponsored by Withum Smith & Brown, which is a forward-thinking, technology-driven advisory and accounting firm that is committed to helping big and small companies be more profitable, efficient, and productive in today's complex business environment. Withum now also has a dedicated crypto and blockchain technology team to help early-stage businesses properly navigate all the crypto tax-related matters. I've been using Withum both personally and professionally for nearly a decade for all of my business's personal needs as well. I'm very happy with them and I highly recommend Withum. You can contact Withum by visiting their website at withum.com. Now back to the show. All right, Bruce, welcome to the show, man. We're finally figuring this out. Let's start again because we were doing this on Zencastr. So if anybody from Zencastr is watching, fix your crap. There's something wrong with your speeds.
And Starlink too.
Yeah, and Starlink, right? Let's go, Elon. Come on. You're getting a lot of heat from Putin, but you're also getting it from Bruce now. All these damn politicians. All right, let's start off. Tell everybody where you're from, where you grew up. I like to start the interviews that way, kind of get an understanding about who little Bruce was. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I grew up in the investment business. My mom was a financial advisor and stockbroker back starting in the 70s. So as a little kid, I grew up on the brokerage firm floor and traded stocks really young. And then I got into it pretty young. I got my first job at 14. And then I went and joined the Navy. And then when I came back, I was going to go to college and I ended up kind of trying to get a temporary job as a broker's assistant. And I just ended up staying and became licensed, became a financial advisor. And, I've been doing that ever since in some form or another. And I've been really lucky to have a really neat career where I started kind of retail and moved up to huge institutional business. And I got to travel all over the world and then do interesting things. And then I got into crypto. I got into Bitcoin about 9 years ago. And I've been in that full time since then. So it's been a great journey.
Like I was saying, like your mom was very successful. She was you're buying stocks at 9 years old. Like what compelled you to want to join the military? I mean, most people join the military, I think largely for opportunities in life. Maybe they get job training. Underprivileged folks join the military a lot of times. Maybe they need medical, insurance, et cetera, whatever it might be, right? It's like a career path for a lot of people, but you had opportunities. So what compelled you to want to do that? Number one, and also number two, as I understand it, you actually had some Navy SEAL training at some point when you're in the military, when you're in the Navy, which is really pretty dope. So if you could tell us about those
Well,
experiences.
yeah, I mean, that was why I wanted to try and do something hard and try and do the training. I didn't become a Navy SEAL, but I did try the training. I made it through Hell Week, so I wanted something that was a challenge. I wanted something that, kind of served my country. I just thought it was a challenge. I mean, it's interesting to try and look back now at my age to look at what my mindset was at 18, 19 years old. I guess I was 18, maybe in 17. Yeah, I guess I must have been 18 when I joined. And, so it's, you think differently when you're an 18-year-old. I thought of kind of probably like your typical recruiting ads, see the world and meet new people and have an adventure and have a challenge and serve your country. So that was pretty basic stuff, I guess.
So, obviously we're going to talk about you running for Senate. We're going to get into that in a second. But more recently, what came into the news was Roe v. Wade, right? That kind of reemerged. When we were going to originally speak, it was about a week ago. It was actually the day that it happened. I think it was like May 3rd, right? And that the night before a Supreme Court draft, right? Opinion, I should say, Supreme Court draft opinion was released that would overturn Roe v. Wade. It was basically leaked, which I think is pretty unprecedented. I don't think they've ever seen a Supreme Court draft that was opinion that was leaked like that, which we could talk about that too. I mean, to me, it seems absurd to me when they're supposed to have complete independence and stuff and not influences from the outside. It's like that's crazy. But anyway, I'm just curious, what is your position on that as a libertarian? I know you're a libertarian, right? So I'm just curious, what is your position on what's happening right now in the news as it relates to Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, it's certainly not my favorite issue to talk about.
Right.
It's a tough one. The minute I announced that I was running, I had real strong. There's a lot of single issue voters on both sides, and they're real strong about saying, and especially being a libertarian, they kind of don't know where I'm going to stand on it. Might not be obvious. So a lot of people, they want you to take one side or another. And the problem is in today's politics, this is even broader than just this one political issue, is this divisiveness, kind of you're on one side or the other side. And everybody's like, are you pro-life or pro-choice? And I ask, well, what does that mean to you? What does it mean? And it's not that I'm not trying to be committal, but I'm sort of both, because it really depends on what specific vote you'd ask me for. Am I pro-life? Yeah, I think that ideally we wouldn't have any abortions. But I'm also not going to say that if a woman takes a morning after pill that she's a murderer and she should be punished like a murderer, especially in the case of rape or something like that. I'm also pro-choice in the sense that I don't really want government to be bigger. I don't want a bigger government. Certainly don't want new federal laws. I don't want new restrictions at any level over people. But I also want to protect life. So it's not a simple cut and dry question. And I think we need more nuance in the world. I'd like to focus more on what actual votes would I actually vote on? What are the actual votes, because it does depend. It is different. I'm not just going to be blanket one way or another way or vote the way somebody tells me. So I'd want to get into the nuance and say, what actual vote would there be, and really look at that and think about it carefully.
I will say, and this is from the CNN, right, that I'm about to tell you something, but this is not like, politically motivated from the right or the middle or something. But even the CNN said that President Biden has not even publicly said the word abortion since taking office. And yet the next morning, President Biden releases a statement on the leaked draft opinion. And he says this: if the court does overturn Roe, it will fall on the nation's elected officials at all levels of government to protect the woman's right to choose. And it will fall on voters to elect pro-choice officials this November. At the federal level, we will need more pro-choice senators and a pro-choice majority in the House to adopt legislation that codifies Roe, which I will work to pass and sign into law. So there's a lot to unpack here, obviously, but like they're making this political instantaneously, which is really a shame, so now you're running it in New Hampshire. So it's obviously a topic amongst a lot of voters, and how they, so there's people out there who are going to see that you're running, and they're going to think about this and whatever your words mean to them. So I guess it matters, right? This is becoming a topic that you did not think you were going to be thinking about maybe 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
So here it is.
Yeah. And it's a way to change the narrative, because a lot of people, again, they're very polarized. So I have people that just assuming because I'm a Republican, they're going to assume that I would vote against the way that they believe if they're pro-choice, but that may not be the case. I'm not in favor of a new federal rule. I may vote against it. It really depends what it says. But it is definitely a way to change the topic, and it's a way to galvanize their base, and it's a way to raise funds. And same way Republicans like to scare people on guns, Democrats like to scare people on abortion. They want to, they're running these ads saying they're going to take away your rights, they're going to take away a woman's right to choose, and framing it in very much terms like they're going to take away women's rights. And I don't think that's fair. Even the people who are against it, and also a lot of this stuff just isn't really relevant unless a vote comes forward. Having your opinions pro-life, pro-choice doesn't really mean much. What matters is what you're going to vote on. In New Hampshire, we already have late-term abortions are banned, and we allow abortions earlier on. And I think that's probably the way most of the nation will go. It's become too much of an issue with no nuance. So I ask people who are on the pro-choice side or identify as pro-choice. I say, well, do you believe in abortions all the way up to the 9th month? Because that's kind of what a lot are arguing. In New Hampshire, for example, specifically, we have this.
That's what I was going to ask you, Dad. It's like, specifically because you represent the people of New Hampshire and your constituency is in New Hampshire. So just specifically, what does it mean for New Hampshire people? How does your constituency feel about abortions? And have your team looked at polls and seen what their stance is? Like, tell me more about New Hampshire's position on this and the people in the constituency.
Most people in New Hampshire is not as polarized with single issue voters on either side as much. There just isn't as many, pure pro-life or pure pro-choice people. And those people in those groups, particularly, they build up more and more by being more on one side or the other. So the pro-choice people are like, absolutely no restrictions whatsoever at all, none ever, no matter what. And the pro-lifers are like, this is murder at conception. And I don't think either of those views are reasonable. I don't think it's reasonable to have, absolutely zero society, overreach or overlooking of any abortions at all. If somebody decides to, there's sick, crazy people out there. If somebody decides to have an abortion one day before the due date, I think that's problematic. It is something that society should look at. But I also don't think that you should have, people with morning after pills being considered murderers. But these groups that, and by the way, I'm unique in the sense that I didn't pledge to one group. They all come to you the day you announce, like, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money. You have to say either this extreme or that extreme. And I think it's more nuanced. So in New Hampshire, we have abortions are allowed up to 25 weeks. And I think that something like that is probably more nuanced and more in line with what, sort of most people want. So I would hope that it stays a state issue. And I think that in New Hampshire, it's, it's not perfect, but it's probably as good as it gets to have that right balance of, where you want it. And these are the kind of nuanced discussions that people should be having about this and a lot of issues, I think.
Yeah, and to your point, it's nuanced, but there are single voter issues. So I'm curious, just like from a poll perspective, I wonder what percentage of people will now come out to vote because of this issue that otherwise would not have come out to vote on both sides.
Yeah, there will be some. I mean, there will be some, particularly on the Democrat side. I mean, that's why Democrats are pushing it so hard, because this is a huge win for them to get this issue brought to the spotlight. It gives it a great excuse to distract from the economy and the COVID tyranny failures and inflation and all of the other things going on, and say, hey, look, here's this scary issue. Republicans are going to take away your rights, and they galvanize support on that.
It's odd that because the majority of the Supreme Court is more conservative. It's odd that they would kind of make this an issue by taking the case on during an election cycle here. But there's another point I want to raise, is that justices can sometimes they do change their votes during the draft opinion as it circulates, and major decisions can be subject to multiple different drafts, vote trading, right? Sometimes up until days before a decision is unveiled. And, it's just odd to me that this gets leaked out. Like, so what is your position and what are your opinions about, like, why or how that even happened? And if there should be anything, should they investigate that? Like you're supposed to have a Supreme Court justice to not be a political position and be thrown into the political kind of gamut here, and which it's become now. And it just seems like it's the first time it's ever happened. It seems very odd to me.
Yeah, the leak seems bad. I would have thought it benefits the Democrats. So I would think if the Democrats leaked it, but just, I mean, they didn't put it on the agenda. I don't think anybody's that crafty. So it got on the agenda and somehow the decision was made. So the leak is only part of it. But either way, however it happened, it's definitely being used politically, which is too bad. There's a lot going on. I mean, frankly, I don't think it's going to be the big issue for this Senate. we're in very, very serious times right now. We're in a fourth turning. Everything is changing in the world. We have geopolitical turmoil. We may have war and all kinds of other issues to face. We certainly have massive economic issues. If people are hungry and there's other things going on, this may not be as much of an issue. It may have to be left to the states. I think it's better left to the states anyway. I mean, you don't really need the federal government to being involved in this. And it's such a divisive issue. I mean, why not find, we've had so much division over the last, several years, why not find something that we can agree on and try and work to rebuild this country? So I think it would be a mistake for the Republicans to try and take this opportunity. Both Republicans and Democrats can use it as an opportunity. And I don't think it's right in either case. I don't think it's right for the Democrats to distract with it. And I don't think it would be right for the Republicans to say, aha, now we have an in. Let's make a federal law to make it so that we'd never have any abortions anywhere in the country, especially something really strict, life begins at conception and any abortion after conception is murder. And the person gets tried as a murderer. If it's federal, that means the FBI would investigate. I mean, do we really want the FBI investigating women because they took a morning after pill? I don't. I wouldn't be in favor of that. So again, nuance. We got to think through these things in a way beyond the talking points. With serious times right now, with serious stuff going on.
I agree. So here we are 30 plus years later, after you did your military service, you've ascended to become a wealthy, very successful business person, which we could talk about as well. You became a multi-millionaire. You're a libertarian Bitcoiner, as we discussed, running on the Republican ticket now for Senate. And you've done the unthinkable here, right? You want to serve your country again, right? What the hell are you doing?
Oh, I know. I ask
Why are you
myself
doing
that.
this?
I ask myself that every day. I say, I can't believe I'm doing this. What am I doing?
Why are you doing it? So I know it's a number one question people are going to ask you, right? I'm just curious. You're injecting, as you've said to me, about $5 million towards your campaign to be able to do this. I don't know if it's all at once or over time, but that's your commitment, it sounds like. And I'm just trying to understand, it seems like when I look at your website, it says that you stand for liberty, freedom, free market economics, and obviously Bitcoin, right? So let's talk about your platform. Let's talk about the issues, what's most important to you and the citizens of New Hampshire, because you're running on their behalf. Obviously, it's not for your own self-interest. You're doing the things that you care about, obviously. So let's talk about the things that you care about. Let's talk about your issues. If you could tell me what your platform's all about.
Yeah, it's really about freedom and ending tyranny. I wouldn't be running if it wasn't for what happened over the last couple of years. I think we saw more erosion of freedoms globally and in America than we've ever seen in our lifetime. Kind of anybody alive. It's a big deal. I mean, there's been certain periods. There was times around World War II with the internment of Japanese Americans, and obviously the things that happened in Europe with Jews and everything else, which were far worse. But generally, most people, especially people our age and people under age 80 or so, it's something that we really haven't seen. This level of erosion of freedoms, where we have people, in Australia and New Zealand and Canada being sent to camps and movement shut down, and quite chilling things here in the United States, where we have people being told what information is true by the politicians, people being locked down and kept from their business and kept from their employment for a year or 2 years, kids being kept home, people forced to wear masks, attempts to force people to have an injection, these kind of things. That's just not America. That's not the America that I grew up in. It's not what I recognize. And we have to fight it. We have to fight it or we're going to lose our country. So somebody's got to do it. And I kept looking at this race, hoping that somebody with really strong libertarian credentials would join. I tried to recruit a few people, was really hoping that somebody would do it, and nobody did. So I'm like, well, somebody's got to. You can't have 2022. You can't be the free state, the live free or die straight state. And in 2022 of all times, you're cool with this? Because if we don't send a message that we are not cool with this, they're going to do it even worse. They're going to lock us down even worse. They're going to go the model of China, and they're going to have CBDCs, and they'll lock us down the way they lock down the truckers because they don't like what they're saying. And that's not acceptable. I got to fight that. So I have to fight. I have to do this just to, give people a choice and know that I've done something, to try.
Yeah. You said if you're elected, you want to tear down regulatory obstacles for the crypto industry. You said, I'm in favor of limiting government involvement in our lives as much as possible, whether it's crypto or any other issue to that matter, right? I believe government should reduce the regulatory burdens and get out of our lives, get out of our wallets. I like that line, right? So I agree. There's a couple of things you also put up here. If you don't mind me just reading type of bills that you would sponsor, right?
Yep.
You said elimination of all accredited investor rules. We could talk about what that means for people who don't even know what an accredited investor is, right? Reducing burdens for public and exempt securities, elimination of all AML KYC, codifying privacy as human right, and recognizing Bitcoin as a legal tender. So why don't we walk through, because I think for a lot of the constituencies, they may not in your state, they may not understand what is accredited. AML, KYC, what are you talking about, Bruce? Like, some people don't understand this stuff, but it adversely affects everybody in your state, in the country. So let's kind of walk through that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and those are all kind of crypto. That was on a crypto bullet point, you know, sort of things that are important to Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. But that philosophy is broader. It's about everything. You know, you could take any industry, and I'd feel the same way. You know, we got to get government out of this. And I happen to know this industry the best because I come from Bitcoin and come from finance, and I've seen it. You know, in my career, when you started, you could open a brokerage account over the phone, and you paid in a week, and now you need a driver's license and everything. And younger people, you know, people in their 20s, they think this is the way it's always been. They think that, you know, oh yeah, your bank needs your driver's license and you can't open a brokerage firm without, you know, giving them your social security number. Well,
why did they do it? Right. Because I remember that too. So why do you tell us why they're doing all this? They do it under the guise of something else, but what is the real reason for it?
It's a relatively new thing, you know, modern, AML KYC, which stands for anti-money laundering and know your customer rules, which are a whole bunch of rules that, you know, suspicious activities, all these different rules around banks and brokerages. They've got to know who the people are, have your ID, have your social security number, report taxes and these kind of things, and basically know who the people are. And all of that, you know, I think it was the late 80s that kind of started, but it was really in my career early on in the 90s when that, like I say, when I started, you didn't need an ID to open a brokerage account. And now obviously you need an ID to do almost anything. So it was the first trade center bombing. Actually, they actually increased some of these rules, and then they kept increasing it. And then after 9/11, that was the big one. The Patriot Act was the really big one, where they said, okay, everybody needs an ID for everything because we have to stop against these
Bruce,
terrorists.
like, if you got nothing to hide, what are you worried about? Is that the argument? You got nothing to hide. What are you worried about?
Yeah, that's one argument, but it's a terrible one because
absolutely,
you know,
you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent.
The wheels of commerce need to be smooth, and they need to be greased, and they need to work. And this adds friction. It's just another person in here like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing over there? I need to be involved in this transaction as a government bureaucrat. And we don't need them. And we didn't have them for hundreds of years. It's never been the way that commerce is done. It's not going to be workable. It's going to break eventually anyway. It's just a matter of how much pain it is before it breaks. So we should scrap these things entirely. You know, we don't need government telling people who they, you know, what they can buy, and then it's none of their business who they are. You know, the crime with money laundering, the victim is generally the government. You know, people act like money laundering is some huge, horrible crime with victims. There isn't really victims of money. Yeah, there's no victims of money laundering. There's things related, but that's a stretch. You know, that's just a stretch. You know, it's like saying you can't chew gum because you're worried you're going to stick it under the table in class. You know, people, adults don't need to be treated like children. They don't need to have somebody, you know, nanny state watching where their money is and asking all of these things. And it grinds things to a halt. It's very, very slow. It takes days to do things that should take minutes. You should just imagine how cool it would be if you could just go and just send Bitcoin to an account and buy stocks, and, you know, just like you did for decades and decades and decades before, you know, the 90s and 2001.
No, I totally agree. Explain to me though, right, as a person who's going to be in Senate, how are you going to be able to cross the aisle, or even on your own side, because it's not like all Republicans necessarily agree with this, right? So how do you explain to them why it's not necessary, and how do you get support? How can you create a coalition, so to speak, of support to try to eliminate things like this? How do we get people to get back to being rational and reasonable?
Yeah. Well, you know, what's cool about those particular issues is that I think you could have bipartisan support. So, you know, AOC she's Congress, not Senate, but you know, I can use her as an example because she's this, you know, pretty opposite ideology from me. And there's a lot of people like that. There's people in the Senate like that, you know, even, you know, Elizabeth Warren is a tough one, because I think she's, you know, doesn't really believe the things that she says she believes. But I think somebody like AOC really does believe in, you know, some aspects of fairness. And, you know, I would go and say, well, how can you support something where only rich people are allowed to buy something? You know, you have a world right now with
this would be accredited investor rule. You talking about, right?
Rich people are allowed to buy something and poor people aren't. And same for AML KYC. You know, that affects the poor. It makes it harder, and it burdens them. And the financial services that are mostly used by poor people are the ones burdened the most by this. That's not government's place. Government shouldn't be telling these businesses and these people who needs what ID. That's their own business. Government should be enforcing laws with a victim, not you know, meddling in this. The world is complex enough without them, breaking it further.
Let me tell you something that's crazy, right? So, obviously, I'm a business guy and I have a lot of companies and I have a lot of entities. So we have a local branch here at the bank. They know who I am. I come in, it's hi, all this kind of crap. You probably get the same shit, And my wife, she started an interior decorating business recently, right? Over the last few months. Excuse me. She has her first client. And she's ready to accept payment. So we have the entity. Obviously, we have that already set up. We just didn't set up a bank account. I was like, all right, I'm gonna watch the kids, for a few hours. I'll sit on Clubhouse or something. Right? So she runs down to the bank. She comes back. She goes, oh my God, I didn't have the registration in my car. She goes, where's the registration? She's frantically running around because we have so much time before you have to pick the other kids up from school. We have 2 at home and 2 at school right now, right? So I'm running around. I go, I can't find it. So I'm like, we have to go now and get a new registration card. So open up a bank account. What is going on here? They know who I am, right? I mean, it's just like, if this is 1985, you would have just been like, oh, it's Jay Gould, his wife, Caitlin. No big deal, right? No. So they know who we are, right? So anyway, we get the registration a week later. She comes back and the lady asks for more information. And she's like, well, what do you need? You have my license. You know who I am. You have the bank account information that I gave you. You verified me. And I gave you the registration. And they said, oh, we need a proof of address. You need to prove where you live. And I'm like, you need to have a house to get a bank account? I'm so confused. They sent her home. She comes back with a utility bill. They asked for another piece of information. I had at that point. I go, give me the goddamn paperwork. I run down to the bank. I'm like, I want to speak to the manager here. I want to talk to the vice president of the bank. I don't give a shit. I was so upset. I'm like, I don't understand the point. Let me ask you a question. She's a joint holder of the bank account. Yes, sir. Yes. I go, could she have come in here and closed the bank account and taken the money with her? Well, yes. I go, so if we could take all our fucking money from the bank account, why can't we open a new one to give you more money? What are we doing? It's like not even like it detaches from logic. What's happening? It's incredible.
And this is what crappy regulations do. They make the world not work right. And anybody who's been to second world and third world countries, that just stuff doesn't work. You go to like some second world country with a broken economy, everything's like that. Like, oh, the rule says you can do it this way, but you can't quite do it this way. Or you need this permit, but it doesn't really say you need this permit. You got to go to this guy and you got to do this and you got to know somebody. Or, oh, no, I know my uncle can get it done for you. And that's just crap. Those are crappy systems, but they happen because of huge bureaucracy. And you get situations like you just described where the people don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. Very rarely. I mean, the world is so taken over by big entities and big, systems in place that are bad. Nobody even knows why they're doing what they're doing, so they're just kind of following rules. They don't know really why. And it takes it away from that, as you mentioned in the 80s, you would have known the bank manager. The bank manager was the king, and he or she would knew everything. They knew every customer. Why not? Why don't we have that system? Are we so much better now because our technology is better? No, it's actually worse. And the problems are driven by a lot of government meddling and bad regulation. And especially the really shady stuff is things that they do where, like what they did with the, these sin businesses. They kind of like, well, it's legal to have porn businesses or it's legal to have these businesses, but we expect extra oversight. So it wasn't even a real rule, but you had these legal businesses that were basically impossible for them to open bank accounts and had all kinds of other problems. That's Banana Republic second world type stuff. And we've got to get government entirely out of this business so we can right the markets and right the ship and let people, do actual commerce the way that they can in a natural way.
I agree. Just the last point, we'll move from this for a second, but the accredited investor rule, right? A lot of people don't understand what that means. That means you have to have $1 million net worth or more, or I think as a married couple, $300,000 for the last 2 years and expect to have it this year to be able to afford the right to be able to take your money and invest it in a company. Now, check this out. You know this. You're from the financial world, right? You could have gotten to companies and had tremendous growth on public companies like Amazon. Amazon is a good example, actually. Amazon, but certainly even going further back to like Apple and Microsoft. And if you had bought those companies, even within a couple of years from the IPO, the growth over the last 30, 40 years has been phenomenal. But now we're seeing companies go public that are worth 5, 10, $20 billion. But by the time they go public, they're staying private longer, mostly because there's 0% interest rates and all this other stuff. And as to why that's affording them the ability to do that in the private markets. But on the way up, you're not even allowed. So I have friends, local friends, and they're like, oh my God, you're invested in SpaceX and this and that. It's like, how do I get in it? I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to be a dick, but like, you can't get in it. Like, you're not even allowed to make the investment, which is crazy because 15, 20 years ago, they would have been public and you could have made the investment at the stage level size of the company and where it's at. So to your point, this accredited investor rule, which is insane to me, hasn't even been updated for, I don't even know, decades and decades, right?
Yeah.
As to what these rules are and your level of wealth and stuff. It's probably significantly higher if you were inflation adjusting it. However, it shouldn't even exist at all because who are you to tell me I could go down to Atlantic City and lose all my money and that's okay.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
It shouldn't exist. It's not their business to tell us what to invest in. You know, we don't need nanny government. You know, bad ideas to begin with, but the bad ideas were even written for a different time. You know, they wrote these laws back way, way, way before the internet. They didn't even really have public libraries and they didn't have microfilm. So somebody could just drive to another town and say, I'm a Vanderbilt and I have a bridge in Manhattan to sell you. I mean, that's where I've got a bridge to sell you came from, because there was people who would scam bridges and they'd pretend that they were Vanderbilts and Rockefellers. I mean, all the time. There's dozens of scams like this. It's my 11-year-old loves to read a book about it's a comic book called The Great Book of Hoaxes, and has all these hoaxes where, you know, people would just pull off these ridiculous things. They'd say they were an heir to a European, you know, royal family or something like that, and they'd con somebody in Omaha, Nebraska, and take everybody's money, and then they move on to Lincoln, Nebraska, and then they move on to Phoenix, and you know that doesn't. For even in those days, it was still a bad idea to think that government could fix it, because they couldn't and they didn't, and they certainly can't now. We're in an age of the internet now. Nobody's going to pretend they're a Rockefeller. You know, people can make their own decisions. They can find out on their own. But the whole premise that the government could or should protect from this is flawed, and we know it's flawed because it's never worked for 50 plus years that we've had these kind of rules. And by the way, Bernie Madoff, we can never forget, Bernie Madoff was head of the largest regulator. He was head of NASDAQ regulation, which is now known as FINRA, and at the time was the largest regulator. So, you know, they couldn't even catch somebody under their own chairman was a fraudster. You know, it's not their place, and it's not a legitimate role of government, and it's not legitimate for us to steal money from the taxpayer and say, oh, we're going to give it to these bureaucrats so they can tell you what you can buy. And you can go to Vegas, you can mortgage your house and go. They have mortgage offices right there in Vegas where you can put everything up and running. You know, they have these little desks. You can put your car up, you name it, they will take it and they'll convert it to chips for you. You can, there's no limit. You can go there if you have $100,000 net worth and you somehow get enough leverage to put $1 million in, you can put that on the blackjack table. You can buy 100 lottery tickets a day. You can spend it on whatever you want, but you're not allowed to buy, you know, Carlyle, Blackstone, Apollo, you know, these premium funds. You're not allowed to buy pre-IPO shares. That just doesn't make any sense. It's not government's role to be involved in that. They shouldn't have anything to do with it. Let people buy whatever they want.
I couldn't agree with you more. I want to switch this particular move before we move off of this. I want to switch this over to the Bitcoin community, right? You're on Clubhouse a bunch too, right? And we hear the Bitcoiners and they're like, they get so livid when they hear you speak about that there shouldn't be regulation on things like shitcoins. And I'm like, guys, let the market adjust itself. We just had this conversation a couple of days ago. It surprises me that the foundational kind of ethos of Bitcoin is a very libertarian type of ethos. But when it comes to like, they almost want to control people. Say, I got to be honest with you. I'm going to say something here. Bitcoin Tina, right, was on stage today. Will Clemente put a tweet out. He came into the room today. They brought him up on stage. And Tina starts shouting at him, throws him off. We know how Tina is, right? Throws him off the stage. They bring him back up. He yells at him again. You're just a 4-year-old. What do you know? And they throw him off again. People start texting me, right? I'm laying in bed still. I get texts. I come on stage and go, Tina, what are you doing? Don't bully people. Just because people don't agree with our views, you don't start shouting them down, yelling at them, and they must be complicit to everybody agreeing the same thing. The Bitcoin community, the new maximalism that we're seeing, I want to talk about that for a minute because I think maximalism is great, but I think the way they act very socialist and communist sometimes, and I don't understand that.
Yeah, you got to have a solid philosophy. I like Tina a lot, so I don't put him in this category, but there is a category of and I don't think he's that new, but there's some newer Bitcoiner kind of maximalists who just sort of don't have a deep philosophy. They're just kind of copying like 10% of what Safety says, you know, or something like that. And Safety will say, I love Safety, and he'll say controversial things. He has a really, really, really well thought out philosophy. You may or may not agree. I happen to agree, but he's thought out his philosophy. But if you just kind of grab a couple of his quotes or something that Dan Held said or something that, you know, had traction and you're trying to build a name on it, there are people that don't have much of a philosophy. They haven't really thought about the deeper principles. But the real principles of Bitcoin, in my opinion, are very free market oriented, and letting the markets fix things. I was just saying the other day, there's a lot of coins I don't like, and I wouldn't buy them. And I think they're junk. And some of them are scams. I don't use the word scam too often, but some are scams. And some are more common than scams. They're just bad ideas, bad economics, bad incentives, just terrible ideas. But all those things, even scams, should be allowed, because who am I to judge what a scam is? There are people who thought Microsoft was a scam. Well, what do you mean you're going to put software on computers? That computers aren't even a thing. Nobody's going to use computers. You could have called anything a scam, but it's not any centralized party's job to figure it out. It's all of our job as market participants. And so what I encourage people to do is to speak about it, educate about it. Some Bitcoiners are great at educating people, why, looking at these things. So, is this a bad investment or a good investment, and why, and educating people about that. And ultimately the market's going to decide. And that's the best form of regulation. The more efficient a market we have, the more efficiently it will regulate itself. So if Luna is supposed to be gone, the market can do that real fast, just like we've seen. The market can get rid of things. It may take a while, but eventually when it happens, it happens. And if the markets are efficient and fair, and people have access to information, they'll always find the fair, true price over time. So I'm bigger on letting the markets do their thing, and we don't need centralized controllers, because there's all kinds of problems with that. As soon as we put somebody in charge, who are these great, brilliant geniuses that we're going to get to decide which coins are good and which coins are bad? And then what do? They start evaluating, because Bitcoin is fluid. Bitcoin changes every day. Are they going to start evaluating the BIPs, and they're going to start looking, what are the core developers doing on that? That may change the terms. We're going to have to put it on this list. We're going to restrict Bitcoin if it gets, no. It's none of their business. It's none of their business. If Bitcoin wants to add 30 million new coins and change the supply to 51 million, that's between the people who run the nodes and the people who run the software and the people who decide what Bitcoin is. We don't need government involved in any of that. Even if it was a scam, it's better regulated by the market. So I think that's a core belief of Bitcoin and libertarian thought, is just let the market do its thing. And it's not like I want there to be fraud. I just legitimately believe this is a better way to deal with it. And you look at the ICO wave, for example, there's a lot of junk projects. It wasn't stopped by regulation. It was stopped by the market, because people lost their shirt, and now they're going to learn from Luna. They're going to say, oh yeah, cousin Tony lost 45 grand on Luna. I'm not gonna do that again. My cousin lost he was going to buy a truck, and now he can't because he just lost it on this DeFi thing. That's a great form of self-regulation. You could never do a 2016 style white paper right now and get anywhere. Imagine if somebody issued one right now, even if they had a regulatory clarity, if they had a special get out of jail free card from the SEC, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. All right, let me switch gears, right? You're running for office here. You're running for Senate. Excuse me. And in a recent interview, you voiced support for defunding the police. I want you to expand on that, because obviously there's a lot of police, and I know you didn't mean it in the way that you supported it. So why don't you explain and clarify the defunding of the police and to what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think I probably said I'd like to defund the things the different way. I want to defund everything. Most people are using that slogan. They just hate police, and they don't. They also have not thought out of it. And I've had other relatives that are cops, and I did a cool thing. I was able to do some training with cops for a while, for a couple summers, with some martial arts stuff with my instructor. And so I know cops, and I like cops, and I appreciate when you need them. But the best favor you could do with cops is to keep them safe and have better, public relations. And part of that would be having them have less stupid things to enforce, especially victimless crimes, drug crimes, prostitution crimes, these kind of things, especially drugs. Drugs are the big one. And any kind of nanny states type stuff, enforcing zoning. And, cops get called to do all kinds of horrible, stupid things on behalf of the state. Eric Garner, they were called originally because Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes. So it wasn't so much the cops that killed Eric Garner as some foolish bureaucrat in New York who decided, yes, we need a law. There ought to be a law is a very dangerous phrase to say. So that's what I mean. I'd like to have less laws. Scrap the drug war, end the drug war. That would free up probably a fourth of most police departments, depending where you are, maybe a third, maybe more, depending where you are. That'd free up a lot of their time. I'd like it so that police were only there to enforce real crimes with the real victim, where somebody gets robbed or somebody is threatened or somebody's hurt or something like that. And that is a valuable service for them to have. But, modern policing has been, sidetracked with all kinds of stuff like the war on drugs and other things.
So so the point is, it's not, you're not saying defund the police. You're saying, can we just like not have them go after ridiculous crimes and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, if we had a more peaceful society, we could defund them in the sense that we wouldn't need as much funding. But
That's
no,
true.
I'm not like my priority is not to cut
So
their
less
funding.
less laws and stuff for them to be be less of a need
And
for more of
across
them.
the board, less government, defund everything, really.
Yeah.
Give people. I mean, the ultimate goal is to defund everything and give people personal sovereignty and personal power over their self. There's just steps with that. It's not so much about attacking the police or their budgets. It's about the root problem, which is too many stupid laws. Get rid of the stupid laws, and the police will take care of themselves. And the police probably would like nothing better than to spend their time and resources, especially these big city departments. It must feel bad for officers if you go to somebody who's been robbed and you got to tell them we're not going to investigate, because that'll happen. If you're in San Francisco and you say, hey, somebody broke in, they stole my laptop, they stole $5,000 worth of stuff, they're going to tell you you're out of luck. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. That cops must not feel good about that. So if you just a matter of reprioritizing and making a more sensible system that's based on real justice.
Okay, you've been a strong voice against government's response to COVID-19 in the pandemic. And you said that the government should have nothing to do with this, right? Do you feel that there ever could be a time in the future where the government may need to issue a state of emergency? For example, let's say the virality of a new virus is just as viral, but it's as deadly as, say, Ebola or something like that. Do you think that at some point, if something like that were to come forward, do you feel that there should be a government response in that sense, particularly with like the groupthink that we have today and stuff, like with misinformation I'm saying and stuff? Like, do you think there's ever a point where the government has to get involved in something like that? And because, by the way, I've only made this point because of the virality that we had, highly contagious, right? But not highly deadly, right? So it was an overreaction, which is a problem in my opinion, because it's only a matter of time. I don't know if it's decades, hundreds of years, who knows? There will be a virus that mutates at some point in the future that is just as viral and infectious as that, and contagious, possibly even more, but super deadly like Ebola. And now they've eroded the government eroded all trust from the people because of what they did. And then they're going to be getting killed because I'm not taking that. I'm not going to take that vaccine, or I'm not going to wear my mask or stay inside. So it was just a real injustice what they did to the people. But I'm just curious where you stand, if there ever should be intervention from the government.
Probably not. It's tempting to say yes because we feel like exactly that question. What if it was much worse? But there's a bigger danger that they'll think it's much worse when it's not. And if it really is worse, then I think you don't need government. People will take care of it themselves. I was deadly terrified when it first started back. I heard about it in as early as January 2020. And so I was watching it. I was talking to my friends in China. I was watching what was going on in Wuhan. I was listening to the WHO bulletins every day through January, through February. I'm watching the cruise ship and I'm watching the nursing home in Seattle, and I'm seeing the photos and the videos of people dropping dead in the streets of Mumbai and Wuhan. And I thought this was going to be something with some, 70% CFR rating and we're going to have mass death in the streets. So I went into prepper mode and I locked down. I got a year's worth of food and supplies. I moved to the country and closed the gates. And I'm like, I'm going to ride this out. And then a couple weeks later, I realized it wasn't nearly as bad as we thought. And then I started seeing the
can I ask you a question? Because I was watching it too, and I bought masks and gloves for our little kids, different size. My wife's like, "Can you put that in the basement? I don't want our friends to think you're crazy." And I was like, "I'm not crazy because this stuff's going to run out." I did that in beginning of February. I was right. Yeah. Right when it skipped the pond and it went to Seattle, I was like, bye. I just bought everything I could.
Oh yeah.
And I got really worried, and we were cleaning all the stuff that we got from Instacart, like all this crap, right? But I was watching the numbers, right? I'm a numbers guy, and I'm watching the infections. I'm hearing what they're saying in terms of how long it takes to manifest and actually cause death. And then I'm watching the death numbers and I'm saying, I don't understand. This is like maybe 1% death rate. Like what? And then in the cohorts, right? It's mostly people that are autoimmune compromised in some way. or they're older. And then people will use these anomalies. Well, what about that one kid? And it's like, well, kids fall off playgrounds. Do we ban playgrounds? Like, I just don't understand how the public got very quickly supportive. At least half the country became very, very supportive of government intervention here. It seems very surprising to me.
It was a mass hysteria and a mass panic. And you know what's crazy? Right now, as we speak, there's just as much COVID as there was 2 years ago. I mean, it's here, it's around, but everybody has acted different and changed their. It's no less deadly than it was. I mean, but so really, it's hard to admit for many people, but a lot of what we did for 2020 and 2021 was all for nothing. You know, so it never should have been government's role to say this and do this. It's got to be people's and to answer your question, if we do have something with like a 90% CFR, you don't need government, because people like me, so what happened, I went into prep mode and I hid out, and I thought everybody was absolutely out of their mind for not taking this seriously, because I was listening to the WHO and the so-called experts, and fool me once, you fooled me, but you're not going to fool me again. And I thought that it was super, super deadly and super dangerous. And I remember St. Patrick's Day. And I remember people going to the bars and they were interviewing people. Aren't you worried about COVID? And they're like, no, it's St. Patrick's Day. And I thought they were the stupidest people in the world. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're going to risk dying over to have a green beer? Are you out of your mind? I thought they were crazy. But remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? I adjusted my information 2 weeks later, early April. I go, wait a minute. They didn't all die. We had 1 million people go out to St. Patrick's Day parties, and they were all
same with the people in Florida that were partying in Daytona.
Yeah, those crazy. I remember those crazy people who went to their church, and one woman, they said, how are you going to your church when she's COVID? And she says, well, God will protect me. I said, this woman is absolutely out of her mind. She is crazy. She's going to die, and that church is going to be turned into an emergency room with a bunch of bodies on the floor, because there's not going to be enough. You remember, the morgues are going to fill up, and we need the hospitals.
Well, how about New York City? They had the trailers outside, and by the way, they weren't really being used. Right?
Yeah, the coroners, there's too many bodies, all of this stuff. We got to remember how badly we were gaslighted. But the thing is, if that stuff came to pass, they would have never needed government anyway. Believe me, if come St. Patrick's Day, if 2 weeks later you're like, oh yeah, like downtown Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a bunch of 30-year-olds, 5,000 of them died like that. Well, then we would all lock down. The government wouldn't have needed to lock down. You couldn't have paid people to send their kids to school. I mean, you wouldn't have been able to get that mask off my face. I remember making fun of the Attorney General when he said, don't wear masks. He deleted it, but I save a copy of it. The Surgeon General says, early on when I was panicking about it, I was worried. He's like, listen, people, don't wear masks. And I'm like, you do us, you do you, buddy, we'll do us. Because I thought he was wrong. I was worried. I wanted to get an N95. Or a rebreather even, because I thought it was so deadly. But you got to adjust your information. And humans are best at doing that. People are best at doing that, not centralized bureaucrats.
It's crazy how slowly it took for them to kind of adjust it. It became very political.
Creeping tyranny. And it was really weird. A lot of them were very resistant. Some of the biggest proponents of lockdowns were the ones who were in total denial. There's a New York council member, he was talking about going to Chinatown and, you got to ignore this. This is nonsense. And then they just flipped a switch. It's like the computer chip in the brain. And they became absolutely obsessed about control and controlling people over this idea that they could control, prevent people from having this thing spread based on totally fundamentally flawed ideas that frankly were exported from China. China has this idea, China for the last year and a half, their official COVID count is 0. They're claiming that they had no cases because they were so good at locking everything down. And the rest of the world, because they're in the pockets of China, views this uncritically. All these scientists and so-called experts who want us to think they're credible, they're sitting there at the WHO and the CDC saying, oh, yes, that's true. China had 0 cases. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's crazy talk. It's crazy talk. And we all know it. And so, we can't let these people make decisions. We can't let them decide where we move and what we do. We'll lose everything. We won't even have a country left. We won't have anything left if you have clowns like this deciding who can move and what you got to put in your arm. And
have you looked at the polls of New Hampshire? Where are people standing on this? I know it's a less densely populated state, right? So maybe it's less of a concern. But I'm just curious, where are the polls on what people believe?
I don't see a lot of polls on COVID response response specifically. It's more anecdotal. You know, I'm definitely talking to a lot of voters, and I'm on the campaign trail talking to supporters. And most of the people I'm talking to are like Republican primary voters. And a lot of them are really ticked. You know, they're not happy about this. There's a lot of Democrats who see this as being wrong too, but and especially there's people with personal stories who had their gym closed or their business closed, their restaurant closed. Yep. You know, they're going to vote. They're going to vote hard.
For sure. Okay. I want to switch gears here. So over the last 15 years, decade at least, probably since Obama, the rhetoric has seen me on the left, increasingly so. It's moving towards this, I believe, as a class warfare, vilifying the rich. You know, you've been on record and quoted as saying billionaires are cool, which I think is cool. Some people, these politicians, they've called for higher taxes on the billionaires, people like Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, even as go as far as saying that there should never even be any billionaires. It's a flaw in the system to have a billionaire. I want you to share your thoughts on billionaires, on the wealth, on the class warfare as you know, and, you know, we've been seeing this, like I said, for at least 10, 15 years, and it's increasingly getting worse. Listen, when I was a kid, I used to watch Robin Leach, The Lifestyle is Rich and Famous. And I was that's going to be me someday. You know, I was inspired and it is. By
Congratulations.
That. Yeah. I was very inspired by it. And it's like, it's vilified now. And I don't know what happened. It's like, you finally get to the other side of this and it's like, no, you're the bad guy. What did I do wrong? I just followed my dreams and it happened. Why am I being vilified?
Yeah, that's true. And it's really sad, you know, that they've taken a whole generation and now a lot of these people are millennials. I mean, they're people in their 40s. They've been learning bad ideas for, like you say, 15, maybe even 20 years, you know, where you've had this sort of negative attitude about wealth, like it's bad, like billionaires are bad or something like that. That's crazy talk. Billionaires are great. You know, the way you get to be a billionaire is by providing a good or service that people want, or you inherit it from somebody who did. So either you or somebody who loved you, most likely, or an ancestor, provided something that people wanted. And if they didn't want it, they wouldn't have been a billionaire. So whether it's Steve Jobs, you know, I mean, everybody's got one of these things. Like, I mean, is there any product that, like, you take this and the Samsung, both of which created billionaires? I don't know much about Samsung. I presume there's Samsung billionaires, but obviously Steve Jobs was a billionaire and there's other Apple billionaires. It's a product people want. And Walmart made a product that people want. Sam Walton made a store that people wanted to shop at, and people still shop at it. And you can take almost any billionaire, you know, Mark Cuban or, you know,
Zuckerberg. Yeah.
Zuckerberg made, I remember I was really early. I was actually like user number 8,000 on Facebook because I got it. I was taking evening classes at college when it first was rolled out to students. Again, a product people want, you know? So being a billionaire is cool. It means you've provided something that, especially a self-made billionaire or self-made multimillionaire, you've provided something that people want, and that should be celebrated. And, you know, people have the right to switch. You know, if they don't like your product, they can buy something else. You know, so billionaires are much better than politicians in the sense that they don't have any power over you. They can't directly hurt you, not legally. They can't put you in a cage. They can't take your money. They can't harm your body. Politicians can. They can order somebody to do it. They can make a new law that does it. They can shut down your business. They can say you can't have a restaurant. They can say you got to have an injection in your arm. They can say your kids got to wear a mask. Billionaires can't do any of that stuff. So I think wealth should be celebrated. And I especially feel bad about younger people because a lot of them just learned crap. And now a lot of them are older. Like I say, some of them are 40 years old and then they're teachers. You know, and they're not even the youngest teachers. So you could have learned, you know, all it takes is one generation. 20 years ago, millennials are learning total crap about money and wealth and how it's created. And then they end up teaching, and now they're teaching our kids, and they don't even know that what they don't even know that it's flawed. They just don't have a fundamental understanding. And people really think things like, I mean, for one simple example, they think that to get rich, you got to screw somebody else or you got to take it from somebody else. And that's just a basic flawed thing. What real wealth does is you create something from nothing. So you can take ingredients. It was my dad's birthday this week. So you buy a cake. The ingredients for a cake are like a few dollars, you know, some eggs and some sugar and some flour and stuff. But a skilled cake maker can make $100 cake, you know, and anybody can make a $10 or $20 cake, you know. So if you buy $5 worth of ingredients and you make a $20 cake, where did the $15 come from? You didn't screw somebody for it. You didn't steal it from the little guy. You didn't earn it on the back of somebody. You built it from nothing. Same if you buy $100,000 lot down in Florida and $200,000, $300,000 worth of wood and some skilled people. That's the other thing, skill and risk. And you get some, I mean, I know people, the guys who built our house, like one of them could build a house by hand. Like they're super skilled builders. So he could literally go to Home Depot and buy $150,000 worth of stuff And 6 months later, he could make a really nice house. They're just great skilled builders. And you could hire builders like that too. So now what? Now you have a house that's worth 600,000. So where did the extra 200,000, 300,000 come from? It wasn't stolen from Eddie. It was created from nothing, just like Apple was created from nothing. And that's what people don't understand. They don't understand that you don't have to steal from somebody else. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a win-win game. And wealth and billionaires, they make it better for everybody. They're making a product that we know people want, or they wouldn't have bought it and the person wouldn't have been a billionaire. So the people who are buying that Apple feel that this stupid thing was like $1,600, but I still feel like it's worth it. So I'm not complaining about my purchase. I wish it was a little lower, but they're making a voluntary purchase where I feel that this thing is worth it. And they obviously feel that it's worth selling it to me. And that's a great, form of human and voluntary interaction. So it should be celebrated. And I wish more people would understand that.
There's no way I could disagree with you, obviously, because of what I do and what I've done, but it blows my mind to see the politicians that are out there that are demonizing wealth. And I'm glad that you're running for office for this one particular reason, many others, right? But this one, Naval Ravikant, right? So Naval had a great post, which was how to get rich without getting lucky. And he says, seek wealth, not money or status. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep, and money is how we transfer time and wealth, Bitcoin, right? And status is your place in the societal hierarchy in life, right? Understand that ethical wealth creation is possible. If you secretly despise wealth, it will elude you. This is probably most of these are the politicians, right? Ignore people that play status games. They gain status by attacking people with wealth that are playing the wealth creation game. And you're not going to get rich renting out your time. You must own equity, a piece of a business, to gain your financial freedom. And you will get rich, to your point, by giving society what it wants, but does not yet know how to get it at scale. And people don't understand this, right? Like you just said, my wife actually makes those beautiful like cakes for our kids and stuff like that. She learned, she went on YouTube videos and all this kind of stuff with the fondant and all this. And she could sell those cakes for like $500 to $1,000. We don't need to do that. She does it. She just makes them for our kids, and she just makes them for our friends and their kids and stuff. But people they buy those cakes for like $1,000 to your point, because they don't know how to make it and they want it, right? So there's a high demand, and it's her time that she's actually leveraging, right? But yes, this politician thing that's been happening for the last 15 years on the left, really it's on the left, it's not on the right. They're demonizing wealth. And it's like, how do we reverse this? How do we go back to greed is good? Like how do we go back?
I think one thing is helping people understand how wealth is created, the example that I just mentioned with cakes or houses. And then another thing is, just understanding the nature of risk. There's a very bad idea that the socialists have pushed, and that I say that in a broad term. A lot of regular Democrats have pushed this same horrible socialist idea, which is that having workers is theft. Like, to be a CEO, you're stealing from your workers, and that's just fundamentally flawed, because they do it voluntarily. They're getting a good deal about it, they wouldn't want the job, or they wouldn't do the job. And in a free market, they'll have as many opportunities, and you're not tied with that. But what people are missing is that being an owner, an equity owner, whether you're the business owner or just a minority equity owner, what you're being compensated for is risk. If you have a 9-to-5 job, and this is sad, because a lot of the poorer people and a lot of people who come from middle-class backgrounds, I have bad ideas about wealth. I had a friend one time, his family was basically they were a very blue collar, trades family. Everybody had kind of the same jobs, and they all had union jobs and everything. And they had these terrible, terrible ideas about wealth. They're like, oh, the higher ups are trying to get you, and the owners are trying to screw you, and always make sure your overtime is clocked, because they'll screw you on this and they'll screw you on that. And like, it was always a very negative atmosphere. And they're like, it was us versus them, thinking that they're getting screwed on things. And it just, I felt bad for them, because I'm like, well, they're going to be poor, because they don't get reality, and they're not understanding about risk and looking at how money is actually made. And I'd like to see more people do that. The richest people I know are the happiest people when somebody else makes it, when somebody else does well. And I have a few friends that are billionaires, and I know that if something good happens, those are the people I call, because I know that they're not, even your regular friends sometimes could throw a little shade. There's always jealousy and stuff like that. And particularly the poorer the people. You show me a loser's going to be surrounded by jealous people and stuff. They don't want somebody to be successful.
You're
they don't
the
want
average of the 5
well.
people you hang out with. Yeah,
exactly.
There's another thing he says, by the way, in that post, and it's good. You just reminded me of, it's like the things you're saying are just like, so they gel perfectly with it. And he says here, where was it? It says, play iterated games. All returns in life, whether in wealth, relationships, or knowledge, come from compounding interest, right? So you want to surround yourself with those people. And he basically says you want to stay away from other people. You don't want to partner with people that are cynics or pessimists because their beliefs are self-fulfilling.
Yep. Absolutely. I love
100%.
that. There's a song that Akira the Don took that speech from Naval and mixed it into a song.
Oh, so really?
If you Google Akira the Don, he has a bunch of these. He has Elon and a bunch of them, but he has Naval. So he did a whole album of Naval. So the whole thing that you just read is also a song, and it's super cool. I think it's super cool. Yeah, it's fun.
All right, I want to go switch over to Bitcoin for 1 second before we hop on this. I really appreciate all the time, by the way, but we're almost out of time, and I want to discuss the Bitcoin spot ETF. Okay, this has been debated over and forth, back and forth. They're now apparently Joe Carlos Arley, who you know, right? He said that he heard from a very credible source that the folks at Grayscale sat down with some folks over there. I know that you're kind of in this world and stuff. I'm just curious what your opinion is. What do you think? Do you think they're ever going to pass this? Do you think this is ever going to get passed as a spot ETF? And if not, what are they going to do with that thing? Because that is a disaster. And I would say the SEC's mandate is to protect investors, but they're actually hurting investors at this point that got into this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it, of course. I wish the SEC would have approved it a while ago. I'd like to see some reforms in the SEC. That's definitely something I would do as, running. I don't know if there's ever been anybody who's run for Senate or served in Senate. There can't be anybody who's been an advisor as long as I have. I mean, I've been SEC registered for 30 years, so I know the system intimately. I meet with the SEC. I talk with the SEC. I understand the laws. I understand securities really well. So I think I'd be great at trying to spearhead some realistic reforms there too. The SEC is actually not as bad as a lot of other agencies. It'd be easy for me to criticize them being in the industry, but they're not that bad. They do need some serious reforms around crypto and around a lot of other things. I'd like to make it easier to do investments and do investing. And, we already talked about accredited investor rules and exemptions and things like that. But yeah, I think they should approve it, and eventually they will. They'll kind of have to, I suppose. But you're right; it is hurting investors. So the big picture is that these regulators shouldn't be in the way of what people are doing. They should facilitate the markets for people. So I think it'll inevitably happen. But yeah, boy, it's been really slow.
Yeah, I mean, I was on Clubhouse like a couple weeks ago, maybe it was like 3 weeks ago, and you brought this up. I was in my gym working out, and I couldn't jump in right away, but I came in later, and you're supportive of it. You're like, I'm surprised, and then Joe came on, and he's like, no, it's great that it's not there because Bitcoiners, the self-custody thing, remember, there's all this stuff, and I'm like, okay, so there's 19 million Bitcoin that have been mined, roughly, right? Out of 21 full Bitcoin. And so we have an extra 2 million Bitcoin over the next 100 and blah, blah, blah years, right? But like, was it 2140th or something like that? Is the last Bitcoin being mined? Okay, so if there's only 100 to 200, nobody knows for sure how many Bitcoiners, right? 1 to 200 million people that own it. I've done some math on this and I just looked and I was like, well, how many people have a net worth that is at least high enough to be able to buy some Satoshis or Bitcoin, right? And it's something like 2.5 billion of the 8 billion people on the planet, roughly speaking, that have a net worth of 10. So there's about 50-60 million that are millionaires. And then there's between the 100,000 to 1 million, it's like 500 or 600 million people. And then the rest are $10,000 to $100,000 net worths, right? So addressable market of people that could own it versus that do own it, only 4%. If it's 1 to 100 million people, only 4% of the people that could actually do. So in my opinion, the argument that the maximalists say is I want everybody else to get it in their hands first. Well, why am I going to sell it if I understand what the growth rate is? So you have to encourage me to sell it based on the price of it, right? So it's all about what's the expected return, as we know, right, in investing. So if you're sitting on an asset that you believe is going to be $5 to $10 million per Bitcoin, and the majority of it, it's like the 80-20 rule, right? The majority of it is held by the wealthiest individuals currently. How do we encourage them to sell it? Well, get a spot ETF. Maybe price goes up faster. Then they start to sell it and it gets into the hands of the other people. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's kind of my thesis as to why I think the spot, one of the ways you can maybe have the number go up faster and maybe you get a disbursement of it into the people's hands.
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate goal, I mean, the thing is when we try and guess, that's part of the problem. Because if a regulator tries to guess, regulator says, oh, I think it'll help or hurt. They should just say, just do it. Because the markets, I really believe in the markets will figure it out. We don't know what'll happen because there's always going to be arbitrage and other things. If something, crazy happens, the ETF does really well. There's going to be competitors. There's going to be counterbalancing factors to it. So I just say let it roll. Let the market do its thing. If there's a demand for it, and is there a problem with fractional reserve? Is there a problem with Bitcoin getting tied up and blowing up? Yeah, sure, whatever, but if these things are less of a problem when you don't have government bailouts, you don't have the moral hazard of trying to let government fix things if they break. You just let them roll. I mean, that's one thing that's good about Luna. This whole episode with Luna this week, kind of $40 billion project evaporated, but it happened fast. Fast death or the ending of a problem is preferred to a long kind of drawn out thing, and that's what regulators tend to do. I mean, you look at Mt. Gox. What is it, 7-8 years? They still can't get their act together because the regulators are so ridiculous in Japan that they just can never manage to pay this out. Bitfinex had a hack. They paid it back within like 3 months or something because they didn't have 10,000 regulations to deal with, and they got to keep the company, and the company kept alive. Mt. Gox could have been saved and could have been kept, but there's all these regulations in place that made it so it can't, and they can't. People who have claims can't even get the claims out. So government tends to slow things down and make things less efficient. If you just let the markets roll, there's going to be drawbacks. I mean, I'm sure there might be drawbacks of having an ETF, but let it happen. Let the market be free, and we can deal with those things, because I think overall the drawbacks of government centralized control is much worse.
I agree. Before we hop, you came out April 8th, 2022, said, I am running for the United States Senate representing New Hampshire. I appreciate your support. And if you have $100, $50, or $20, don't send it to me. Go buy Bitcoin. No politician can save you from the melting ice cube of fiat, and I can't either. I commend you, brother. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's cool for you to come on my show. I really appreciate it. This is the guy who does the Satoshi Roundtable. Come on, guys. This is an OG. So, Bruce, appreciate it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and how they can support you in any way?
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm trying to do a decentralized campaign. So I will take donations. I haven't even put them up yet. I haven't pursued it yet. There's too much money in politics, a lot of problems with it. But I mean, I really do need to do that, and time is running short. So I should do more of that. I'm trying to do things quite decentralized. So if people want to help, I encourage them to just help. Go do your own thing. We don't have we're trying to do things fast. So I'd like to do things kind of like we do them in the Bitcoin space. So just do it. If somebody wants to help, they can share my content. They can spread the word, especially to New Hampshire primary voters. If they're in New Hampshire, they can host a meeting or something like that. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities and some paid staff opportunities. But yeah, my website's brucefenton.com, and that has all my positions on it. As you know, from talking to me, I'm pretty open and straightforward. So it's a matter of just getting the word out. If enough people see what I have to say and what I stand for, I think that the votes will follow, because my positions are right in line with what people are caring about right now. And I've gotten a great reception so far.
I wish you best of luck. I hope you get in. I know you have a good shot, actually. I've got other people on here that don't have a good shot to get into Senate, but, that are running. I think you actually do. I was looking at who the folks are they're up against, what their campaign size is, and this and that. It really just comes down to the message, and people resonate, I think. And I don't see why they wouldn't, particularly in your state, which is about freedom and liberties. So
yeah, it's been well received so far. So I'm glad I'm doing it. And it's a very winnable race. If I win the primary, in the general election, the opponent is considered one of the weakest candidates, and I can get the Libertarians and the Independents and even some of the Democrats better than any other Republican. And the Republicans, like I say, they really care. I mean, I can't imagine voting right now in 2022 if you're a Republican and you're not caring about, like, you can't pretend this didn't happen. Like, they locked us down for 2 years. You got to go and vote. So I think there's a lot of people who share that sentiment, and maybe even they don't agree with me entirely, but they know that we've got to send this message, and we've got to right this ship. So I'm optimistic. I think it's very, very, very winnable race. And that's
what do you have? 6 months? When is the election? It's about 6 months, right?
September 13th is the primary, and then the general is just 7 or 8 weeks after that.
Yeah. So you got to get moving. Yeah. Did you say you bought it? Did you buy a Winnebago or something like that?
I did. I got this cool Winnebago to tour the state. I've been using it almost every day. And I go to meetings with it, and it's great because I can have a couple staffers jump in. So we got more room. We can carry the signs around and everything. Plus it's like, it's just, it's kind of nicer. It makes me look forward to going on the road. It just feels better to have like a mobile office and a little more efficient. I can like sprawl out and read and do my iPhone, and
it doesn't feel like an
stuff like that.
obligation at that point because you have the comfort and you can move around.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Bruce, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, man.